Welcome back. With Nigeria's oil production gradually ramping up and projected to reach about 1.8 million barrels per day, and oil price is better at $55.64 per barrel, now may be a good time for Nigeria to save a little more. And the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Dr. Ibe Kachukwu, last month said the federal government is considering plans to lock up revenues realized from the oil sector and save them in the Sovereign Wealth Fund. But how achievable will this be? How workable will this be? Let's talk to Okpeyemi Agbaje, who is the CEO of RTC Advisory Services. He's also an economic policy analyst. So good morning to you, Mr. Agbaje. It's great to have you on the program. So, in the last, you listened to the last conversation I had with Mr. Kola Karim of Shoreline Energy International. So it seems as if we're on a good path, talking to the Niger Delta, meeting with them and engaging with them. And the oil companies too are on that same path. Now, for 2017, in the 2017 budget, it's appropriated benchmark for oil is at 42.50. So we have about $8 extra, thereabouts, coming in from more than that coming in. Where will this excess money go to? Because there's no excess crude account, so to speak, as in it no longer exists.
Well, technically, once there's an excess over the benchmark, whether an excess crude account formally exists or not, the surplus cannot be appropriated. So you have it somewhere. Whatever you used to call it, the excess crude account was not really an account. It was some arrangement, unconstitutional, illegal, that the government of Obasanjo put in place to warehouse those excesses over the budget benchmark. Now, but remember that we've now gone ahead to enact a Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority Act, which is where those surpluses now need to go. But those surpluses don't go there automatically. That's the difference with the excess crude. Those ones have to be directed into that account by the government. And you are aware that we have this legal matter between the governors and the federal government that has stalled somewhat the operation of the sovereign investment. So I would say that irrespective of whether excess crude formally exists or not, if there's an excess over the budget benchmark, because the budget is a law, and the benchmark prescribes the price at which the budget expects appropriated funds to be spent. So once there's an excess, there's a potential saving. It may be in some suspense account, it may be in some central bank account, it may be in an excess crude account, wherever it may be, but it is not an appropriated amount. And therefore, it restores the potential for Nigeria to save.
So why is it that if we have this potential saving, why do we still have politics and this economics of saving versus sharing? Every month, the Federal Accounts Allocation Committee has to disburse, and definitely it's from this excess that has been, gotten from the oil proceeds that have been sold.
Remember, there is also so there's a price, but there's also a quantity issue, a volume issue, a production issue. So if you look at the 2017 budget, I was worried at the assumptions, except for the price benchmark, which was very healthy, very safe, 42.5 when prices are averaging 55, like you correctly pointed out. But the assumption for production in the budget is 2.2 million barrels per day, which was the same assumption in 2016. Now, that assumption in 2016 was far off the mark. We probably did 1.4 million barrels per day. So I was worried because there were no signs. So until yesterday, when we saw that conversation, the Vice President visiting the Niger Delta, some hopeful signs that there's a conversation going on, some concessions in relation to the Maritime University and some of the issues that have been a problem in the region. So with the fact that, okay, so there's a dialogue going on, there is at least some hope of a more congenial atmosphere for oil exploration. Hopefully, government will conclude that negotiation with the region and there will be no bombings or pipelines. And therefore, that production target becomes slightly more realistic. So it's in the end, what goes into the budget is the price times the production. And therefore, so even though there's a price surplus until we ramp up production, there won't be an income surplus.
But the Ministry of Petroleum is expecting production to ramp up to as much as 1.8 million barrels per day.
Which is still 400,000 barrels short of the budget. The Minister of Finance has put 2.2 million barrels per day in the budget. So I think the more realistic figure in terms of production, in fact, that was the precise figure we were working with, because we didn't think it was likely that we would take production in the course of this year. Even if you restore peace, there are some things needed by the oil companies to restore wells and all of that, to fund the programs and all of that. So 1.8 million barrels is probably a more realistic figure. But going to I am always been a supporter of saving. You see, I have a recollection, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, of being somewhere in this building debating the then minority leader of the House of Reps, who is now the majority leader, precisely about saving. And the sentiment among Nigeria's elites, even then, we forget now, was that there was no need to save. And some of us were arguing that, see, we can't behave like an industrial economy or any other economy in which its budgets are based on tax revenues. Our budgets are based on commodity revenues, which are volatile. We go up and down. It is wiser to have a mechanism to stabilize your budgets so that you don't spend 7 trillion this year and then 5 trillion the next year and then 8 trillion the next year based on the price of oil. So if you create a mechanism for stabilization, then you can have a steady increase in food. So if you save when the price is high, you release some of it when the price goes low, and then you have stabilization. So I have always been of that opinion, and I'm a huge supporter of the concept of saving. So I'm with the Minister of Petroleum on the desirability of saving. I'm completely with him. What I'm pointing out to is that actualizing that desire may be slightly undermined because we have made over-ambitious production targets in the 2017
But if
budget.
he gets the buy-in of the National Assembly, for instance, or the
Because the
executive,
budget has not been passed.
Well, but if he does...
Yes.
So at the end of the day...
We can adjust the production. If we keep the price, we may even slightly raise the price, given what we're seeing, to 45. We may raise the price, so we have a 10 margin on average, probably through the year. We can save that if we adjust the production target.
So we could get 100% savings put in the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, for instance, if probably it gets a sign-off from the legislature, that's the National Assembly or the executive. Who should be the person to...
Everybody should be... So first of all, the budget assumptions, there's still a risk. Let me tell you the history of Nigeria's budgeting at the National Assembly. The history of Nigeria's budgeting at the National Assembly, and this is not just during the Jonathan era, it was also an issue on the Obasanjo years and the Yar'Adua years. So they're going to debate this budget in the National Assembly, and the legislators are going to see that, why are you budgeting 42.5? When we can read the newspaper, we see that it's 55. Why can't we raise it to 52.5? Now, that is what we have done from 1999. And you needed the stubbornness and sometimes the unconstitutional behavior of President Obasanjo to force his view then, and that is why we were able to accumulate some savings. And when we had less assertive leaders, they buckled under and the savings disappeared. So there's still a risk about that conversation in the national. So Nigerians have to add their voice to it. We should learn from our most recent experience. We should leave a healthy margin between the current price of oil and the budget benchmark so that there is a potential for saving. So that right now, as oil prices begin to rise, no matter how little, we should be accruing some savings into the sovereign wealth fund.
But if you save 100% of oil revenue,
not 100%. I don't support the notion. It's not even a realistic notion. We cannot, in our current situation, save 100%.
How much can we save?
I think the realistic thing, as is now the law, subject to the resolution of the Supreme Court case, is that we save any excess over the budget benchmark that the National Assembly has fixed. So if you took this year, The proposal by the presidency and the Ministry of Finance and the Budget and Planning is for a budget benchmark of 42.5. You have a 55 average oil price.
So we're
There's
having
a potential of 12.5%.
About 13.
12.5, yes, 13 naira dollar saving per barrel of oil sold by.
So I quickly did the calculation, and that will give us about 28.60 million if we reach 2.2 million barrels per day potential.
Absolutely, yeah.
But if we do 1.8 million barrels per day times 13, that's if oil prices maintain the level of 55, 50, 56, 57, we'll be saving about $23.40 million. So at this time, per day. So at this time, put politics aside, and because we're in a recession, maybe the case for saving versus monthly sharing should be the focus. And so maybe at this time, an arm should make sure that this monies go to the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority for safekeeping.
Let me balance the conversation. Savings, the concept of saving when you're a commodity nation like Nigeria is a stronger proposition when oil prices are very high. Because there's also a counter-argument now. Unfortunately, this is in theory, conceptually, the wrong time to save. This is the time to reflate your economy because you're in recession, to spend, to empower people, to create infrastructure and jobs. So this was an argument, a consensus you and I and the minister and the National Assembly should have had when oil prices were 100 or 80, 100, $110 per barrel. We could easily have saved, put our budget benchmark at 75 and saved $25 per barrel of oil sold by Nigeria. And we may have, remember that in the Obasanjo years, when we grew our reserves to $68 billion, oil prices were around $60, $70 per barrel. But because Okozie Okonjo-Iweala, as finance minister, and the president Obasanjo then, insisted on that gap between the benchmark and the budget, irrespective of what the oil price was, there was always an accrual. And between 1999 and 2007, we accrued $68 billion both in the excess crude and in the formal official reserves. So that's all I'm calling for. I don't care what the margin is. Just leave a healthy margin, $5 even $2.5 if oil prices are low. But leave a margin. So, and then ensure that we achieve consensus on the idea of a sovereign wealth fund. We have to resolve that matter in the Supreme Court. Because I think, I'm not sure what the current status is, but I think that the Supreme Court gave an injunction of some sort, stopping the federal government from taking further monies beyond the $1 billion that were taken at the commencement of the sovereign wealth fund. So that's why Nigeria has not been able to accrue further resources into that. And that's why we went to town. Now, if we resolve that, that means we need some accommodation with the states. For me, the worst case scenario to resolve this and move on is that we save from federal government share of revenue only, if the states insist on not participating. So that's the worst case scenario. If you try and resolve this and the states say, no, we are not interested, you are the federal government, you are the one that wants a sovereign wealth fund, that so and so. The worst case scenario is that we say, okay, we are a federal government, we have a responsibility to protect the economy of the country. So the worst case scenario is that we amend the laws and save only from the federal share of revenue. But I think the more optimal solution is that beyond the federal government, the Sovereign Investment Authority should save even for all the states, but it should be clear what portion belongs to each state. So that could be a consensus midway approach that says that we are this Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. We will insist that every entity within the Nigerian economy should maintain some savings, because when they can't pay salaries, they come back to the federal government and say, lend us money. But we would know that this amount is being saved for X state. So it's appropriated savings. Every state's share of the savings is known. That would be a kind of consensus I would like to have.
Okwemi Agbaje, CEO of RTC Advisory Services and Economic Policy Analyst. Let's anchor this conversation here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Business Morning continues after now. Stay with us.